Hello, my name is Julie and welcome to this tutorial. Today we're going to be looking at widget integration. Specifically, we're going to integrate a HighCharts Maps widget into Wisej. So here I just have a blank Wisej project using Wisej 4. I'm going to go to the toolbox and create a widget. There we go. Hit escape a few times. We'll click on the widget, go ahead and change the border. There we go, border style to solid, just so we can see it a little bit easier. And when I click on this widget, you notice three things. We have the packages, we have the init script, and we have the options. So let me explain each of those quickly. The packages is going to be a series of scripts that we need in order for the widget to run. We'll load them from a CDN, a content distribution network. The init script is going to be the code that runs when the widget is initialized. So we need to set that up. And then the options is going to be a JSON, which is a configuration for our widget. But first, let's check out HighCharts Maps. So let me just show you how I found the documentation. So if I just search for HighCharts, we can go here. I'll go to demos. And if I scroll down, we can find our demo here, which is the demo that we're going to be trying to create within Wisej. So this is what we're going to be trying to emulate. And if you look, if we click on JS Fiddle, we can actually get the code for that demo. And right here, you notice there's a series of scripts that they load. So these are the scripts that we need to put in here into packages. So I'll do the first one and then I'll speed this up for the rest. So we can just copy that, go to packages, click add. That URL is going to be our source. There we go. And it needs to have a name. So you notice this one was just highmaps.js. So I will just call it highmaps. It doesn't really matter what you name it. And then we'll add the next one. Okay, so that's all of those added, and we'll click OK. So now that we've got our packages, we need to work on our init script. And in order to do that, we're going to have to kind of dig into this JS Fiddle code. So we can see here, this is the HTML. We've already got this. This is the CSS. We can pretty much ignore this. And this is the JavaScript. Here we have some JSON, which contains our data for the map. So like how colored in each country should be, based on, I suppose it's based on airport density. So we can skip over that. So let's scroll down. It's pretty long. All right, then we have this here, which is getgraticule, which you'll notice it loads all of the meridians, the latitude and longitude lines. So let's go ahead and collapse that. Then we have this after animate, which I'm going to pretty much completely ignore. This just does this little line here going from LA to Amsterdam. We're not going to include that in our demo. And here we have the good stuff. So we have highcharts.getJSON, and we have our chart initialization. So if I look up the getJSON file in their API, so if we go to HighCharts API, and we want get JSON. There we go. So getJSON takes two things, a URL and a success. So the URL is the URL to load. So it takes this here, this URL here, which if I go ahead and copy that, there we go. So this is the JSON from that URL. And then the other thing getJSON takes is a success, which is a callback function, which is what will happen if it successfully loads. So it's basically taking this JSON, and then if it can get that JSON, it's doing this success thing. So this topology function here. And this is the code that we need, specifically this little snippet right here. HighCharts.map chart. This is actually initializing the chart. So let's look at what map chart does. So we have the map chart class. So it's got the constructor, and then we can look at chart because it's derived from chart to actually see what that constructor does. So we can see it has a render to, so the DOM element to render to, or its ID. It has options, and it has callback. So we're going to ignore callback. We don't care about that. But we have our DOM element to render to, and we have our options. Remember earlier when I mentioned here that we had options we could set up? That's the same thing. So we'll be sending our options in here, or setting them up in there at least, and then sending them to our chart. And we need the DOM element to render to, or its ID. So we need to set up an ID. And if you notice here, this is their ID container, and this is where they set it up, right? So in their HTML, their div has an ID of container, and they're telling it here that the ID is container. So let's go ahead and go to our init script. And here is our code. This init equals function options. So you can see here we have access to options. So it's going to be very easy to send them in. And then let me paste in our initialization script. So this is our script, and then let's walk through what this does. So this dot container is the DOM element that Wisej creates for our widget to render into. And then the ID is, of course, the ID of that container. So we set it to chart ID. You can set it to whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. And then this dot widget, so that's our widget. And then we're calling the constructor here HighCharts.mapChart. Remember HighCharts.mapChart right there. That's our constructor. And then we're sending it chart ID and options. Again, remember our constructor takes our DOM element to render to and options. So that's chart ID and that's options. Okay, so we've got that set up now. And if I hit OK, you'll see it renders a little chart here, right? So it looks like it's working so far. Let's go ahead and continue looking at this code. So there's our chart. So we have rendersea, which just renders this blue part here. And then on redraw, we rendersea again. So that's about it really for the code. So now we just need to get the rest of this code implemented into our chart. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the rest of this code. So I should be able to collapse this here, right? So that was our code to initialize the chart. And then we just have this function here called rendersea, which just renders our circle here, this sort of blue circle for the sea. And then if I scroll down, we're just calling rendersea on redraw. So that's pretty much it for the code. Let's go ahead and look back at this chart and all of this stuff here that we need to implement. I'm not going to implement it all, but I'll show you how to implement a bit of it, and then I'm just going to copy paste in the rest. All right, so we need to implement all of this stuff in here, all of this, what looks like JSON here, this chart, title, subtitle, etc. This isn't actually technically JSON, it's JavaScript object literal style because it has like functions and things in it, but it looks a lot like JSON. So let's just do one little bit here. Let's just implement this title here. So one thing I can do is I can go ahead and copy it. And if I go here to my chart, if you see options here, I can set it in options. Because remember, all of this stuff here is options. So when I click here, it pulls up this window. I can paste that in, delete the comma, and we should be good to go. I'll click OK. Oh, what am I missing? Open and close brackets, perhaps? There we go. Okay, and you can see that set the title. So now the title is airport density per country. You can see here, right, I set the title, the text to airport density per country. So that's one thing you can do. However, it can be really annoying to copy in all of the options. You'll also notice that it's formatted itself. Notice everything is in quotes now, right? Before, like title was not in quotes, text was not in quotes, and now it is. So let me show you the second way, which is the better way to implement this. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And we're going to go to my page. We're going to add a load handler. And then on page load, we're going to go ahead and set the title. So we're going to say this dot widget 1, right? Because if we look at our widget, you can see here it's called widget 1, right? You'd use whatever the name of your widget is, but the default name is widget 1. Dot options. And here we can set anything within the options. So in our case, you can see here we're going to set the title. I could also set the chart or the subtitle or the legend, things like that, right? But we're going to set title. Options dot title equals, and let me just pull this up so we can see it side by side. So we can see here we have the open and close brackets. So in our C# version over here, this is going to be an anonymous object. So we're going to say equals new, and then we're going to open a bracket and hit enter. There we go. This is a line of code here, so we need to end this with a semicolon. And then we're just going to put just this stuff into here. So an anonymous object, we have text that equals airport density per country. So notice I did an equal sign instead of a colon. And then we're going to do a comma. We'll do floating equals true. Align equals left. And then here you notice we have more curly braces. So this is actually going to be an object, an anonymous object nested inside of our first anonymous object. So I'm going to say style equals new. And then, let's see, it says text outline equals 2 pixels contrast. Okay. So we're going to save that. And if you look in my designer, it's not showing up, right? Because I didn't set it with an options, but it will show up at runtime, right? Because this code will run whenever the page loads. So let's try that out at runtime. And there we have our title, airport density per country. Okay. So again, I'm not going to go through all of this. but you kind of get the idea of how you can set it up. I will do one next piece, which is to just get the globe rendering. And in order to do that, we need a couple of things. You notice here in chart, we set the map to topology. So I need my topology, which if we look here, this is the JSON for the topology. So if I copy that and paste that here, right? This is the JSON for my topology for my map. So I need to save that into a JSON file and put that in my project. I also need the data here, this airport density per country. Oh, right. This is that data. This constant data equals, right? So that JSON there is the airport density per country JSON. So let me just copy that JSON. Okay, so let's copy our JSON. So we've already got our JSON for the topology. If I check pretty print, you can see it looks a lot nicer, right? But I don't particularly care about that. I just need to Control A, Control C to copy it all. We need a new file here. Add new item. They have JSON. They do have JSON. And we'll just call it world topo. Click add. And we would just paste that in there. All right, there we go. So we've got our JSON in there. And we also need a JSON file for this stuff, our data. We'll just call it airport data because this is our airport density per country. So JSON file, call it airport data, add, and let's copy that. I don't want this bracket here because I don't want it, this is an array here, right, with this type of bracket. We just want the curly braces for the JSON, so I'm not going to copy that. Let me scroll down and copy all of this. There we go. Control C, Control V. Okay. And I just want to note that technically you could put that JSON in the options here. Like if you're setting the options and we're saying something like go here, right? Chart, map, topology. Instead of saying topology, which links to the JSON file, you could just put the JSON directly in there in options. But that's just going to be really, really annoying to do, so I'm not even going to show it. But just know that is something you could do if you wanted to for whatever reason. But in our case, we're going to load the JSON through C#. So let me just go ahead and take this and turn that into C#. So just like before with the title, I'm going to do this dot widget 1 dot options, and then here this is chart. So we'll say dot chart equals, and then this is going to be a new anonymous object. New anonymous object. We need a semicolon to end the line of code, and then the only thing in here is map equals topology. So we're going to say map equals, and then we'll go ahead and create a function called get topology. And you notice it's got the nice little red underline because we haven't created it yet. So let me just copy in that function, and then I will explain what it does. So we have some things we need to import here. So if I click here, what does it want me to import? Using system. So we needed to say using system up there. And what else? Using system.io. Right, so using system, using system.io, you need to put those at the top of your file here in order to get this to work. Okay, so let's talk about what this code does. Let's start with application.mapPath.worldTopo.json. So worldtopo.json is a relative path. In this case, it's relative to our base folder HighCharts Maps video. It doesn't look like a relative path, it just looks like a string. But let's say it was inside of a subfolder, like, I don't know, folder name / worldtopo.json. In that case, you would include the folder name and it would be able to navigate to it. But we just put it in the base on our root folder, so we don't need any kind of file structure here. But application.mapPath will take that and convert it to whatever the actual file path is. So like C users HighChart Maps video worldtopo.json, something like that. Okay, so that's what application.mapPath does. So it's going to return a file path essentially. And then we send that file path into file.readAllText, which is just going to read the entire file at that physical path into memory. And it's going to return it as a string. So this variable here, JSON, is going to be a string. I've just called it var to be a very generic variable. Like var means you're not indicating what type it is. But I could just say string if I wanted to be more specific. It doesn't really matter. This line of code will compile either way. And then what happens here is we're taking our JSON string and we're sending it into json.parse, which will actually turn that string into JSON. So we're going to return JSON. And you'll notice we're returning an object, right? Object is the return type. So we're returning our JSON object. And so that means that map equals getTopology, map will equal our JSON object. So let's go ahead and run this. And so we have an issue. So it was trying to parse the JSON and it ran into an issue when it was parsing the JSON. So something is wrong with our JSON. So let's look at worldtopo.json. If you look right here, you notice we have 2 open brackets. So let's try and get rid of that. And at the end, let's see if we have an extra. Yeah, we have an extra bracket there. So let's save that. Try it again. And now it runs without errors. You notice here that you would think it should work, right? Like we have our title set up and we have our chart set up, like map equals getTopology. We should be loading the world map. It turns out that for whatever reason for HighCharts Maps, you need to also load the data. So our airport data, we need to load that. So let's go ahead and load our airport data. Okay, so if I run my project, we notice I get an error when it's trying to parse the airport data.json. So let's figure out what's going on here. If I go to airport.json, it looks all right. It's a valid JSON file. If I go to page1.cs, you can see this is where I'm reading it. And this is where it is in the options. Let's go ahead and look at the JavaScript demo that we're getting this from. So the first thing I notice is that this data, which remember, this is our airport data. This is an array. So we need it to be an array. So that's an issue here. And let me just show you also where it's being loaded really quick. here's where it's being loaded, right? Series data, right? That's where it's being loaded. Okay, so let's go ahead and make this into an array. So delete those curly brackets, make it into an array, save that, run that. And that fixes it. It runs, and now we can see our data. There is a different way you could fix this. So let me show you the second way. We keep it as an array, but we could save it inside of a JSON object. So we could call it airport data. And let's see, we have open bracket, open bracket. So we need another close bracket at the end. If we save that and then run it, so you notice it doesn't give us an error. It is reading the JSON. However, it's not reading the data, so it doesn't quite work. That's because here we're just reading airport data. It's not getting the stuff inside of airport data, right? So JSON has airport data, which is wrapped around our actual data that we need. So the way to solve that would be to do just dot airport data. And now if I run this, now it works. So one thing to note here is that JSON.parse is a built-in Wisej function. There are other ways you can parse a string into JSON. One would be to use a package called Newtonsoft.json. So we can install it like so, manage NuGet packages, search for Newtonsoft, install Newtonsoft.json. And then once it's installed, I can go ahead and add this code. Okay, and you notice at the top it says using Newtonsoft.json, right? So it added that in. So all we're doing here is we're taking our JSON string, we're sending it into JSON-convert.deserializeObject, we're specifying an expando object, so we want it to return an expando object, and then we're just sending it JSON, and then a new expando object converter, which is just a Newtonsoft converter that knows how to turn JSON objects into expando object instances. We can also do this for our airport data, which you remember is a little bit more complex, right? We had our airport data array in here. So that code looks like this. We're doing JSON convert.deserialize object expando object. So the same line of code that we had before, right? Essentially. We're just assigning it into payload instead of returning it directly. And then we are taking payload, casting it to an iDictionary, and from that dictionary, we're pulling out airport data. So that's all that's going on there. So if you wanted to use Newtonsoft instead, this is how you would do it. However, we're just going to use the built-in Wisej function. Okay, so if we look at our map, it's looking pretty good, but if we compare it to the demo, there's a couple of things that are missing. So the main thing is that it's not 3D, right? It's not a globe. And the other thing is you notice that the color is blue. It's not this nice green color that the demo has. So let's go ahead and go through the options here and convert each of them into C# code, and we'll get it looking good. So I'm not going to type out each one. I'm just going to copy paste them in just to save a little bit of time. So let's see. First we have our chart, which has the map. map equals get topology, right? So I'm just going to move that to the top just to make it look a little nicer. Next, we have our title, which we have our title set up, airport density per country. Next, our subtitle. So let me paste in that code. And if I run this now, we see we have our little subtitle showing up now. Next, they had legend enabled to false. So let's add that in. Map navigation. There we go. And map view. Map view is what will make it 3D. So let's add that in. Let's run this now. So you see it's now 3D, and I can rotate it. Color axis. So this is what will make it green. As you can see now, it's that nice green color. And this is pretty much it. Let's see. Their series. So color axis is good. Tooltip we don't care about. Plot options we don't care about because we're not going to do the animation. Here, their series is actually an array with 2 things in it, right? Which I believe we can leave for now. Okay, so we've got that working. So the last thing we need to do is we need that blue background that they have, and we also need the latitude and longitude lines. So you remember their blue background was this rendersea, and their latitude longitude lines, I believe, was getgraticule. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add these latitude and longitude lines that show on the globe. If we scroll through here, we'll notice there's a function called getgraticule. Here it is. So we create this empty array called data, and then we create the meridians and the latitudes, and we store all of that in data, and then we return data. So this is our code that we need to run in order to create the latitude and longitude. So this is JavaScript here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take our init script and we're going to add another function to init script, in this case getgraticule. So let me copy this. Control C. Control V. There we go. There's one thing I'm going to change. So they had constant getgraticule. I'm going to do this .getgraticule. So now getgraticule is one of the functions of the widget, right? That's what the this is. And click OK. There we go. So we have our code that generates the data, and we just need to call it at the correct time. So one other thing we need to change is this series. So far, we've been neglecting some code here. So you notice in the original code, they had this graticule, and they say data is getgraticule, right? So that loads the latitudes and longitudes right there. And then the second data was just our airports per million kilometer data, right? Which is what we have here. So I need this code to go right here. And I'm just going to copy that in instead of typing it. There we go. So this is the C# version of that JavaScript code. and our data, you notice, is blank. So our data is being generated through JavaScript. We're actually going to fill it in not here in the C# code, but we're going to fill it in our JavaScript code. So let's save that and go back to our JavaScript code. Go back to the init script. So we need to fill it in when it's initialized. And the way we can do this is we'll just go options, right? So to get to our options, dot series, right? Because this object here is called series. There's two things within series, right? Remember, series is an array. Notice this little symbol here. So it has this graticule thing and this airports per million kilometer data. So we want the first thing in series. So series brackets 0. And then that will get you this object here. Out of this object, we want to get data. So I'm going to say dot data. And that equals, and then we need to call our getgraticule function. So this dot getgraticule. So this is enough to get it to work, but there is one more place I want to call this code. So this code is being called when it's initialized, but I also want to call this code whenever the options are updated. So I'm just going to paste that here so that whenever we update the options, like let's say we change something, then the latitude and longitude lines will get redrawn. So click OK. Now it says can't read properties of undefined reading 0, but I'm not really worried about that because this is just design time. It'll still look fine at runtime. So let's hit run. And we can see our latitude and longitude lines are appearing. And because I added it to the update function, if I were to update any of the properties, they would still be there. Next, let's go ahead and work on that blue sea that appears underneath the graticule. Okay, let's get this rendersea function implemented. So first, I'm just going to copy the code. We're going to put it in our init script. I'm going to change this function header. So right now this is an arrow function, but instead I just want it to be a function of the widget. So I'm going to do this dot rendersea, get rid of our arrow function, and it's just going to equal function and take one parameter called e, which we will use. I'll click OK. Let's go ahead and save and run this. And it compiles. We need to change something about this function. You notice it refers to chart a lot. And we don't actually have anything called chart. We're going to send in the chart through this E here. And it's actually going to be target. So here, let me show you how we call this function. So we're going to call the function here. This.rendersea target this.widget. And now you notice if I run it, yeah, it says chart is not defined. And if I run it, I will get the same error, chart is not defined. So let me call this one more time. We've called it in the init function. We also need to call it in the update function. And we need to change this code. So we want e.target whenever it says chart. And I'm just going to go ahead and paste that code in. So there we go. Now it says e.target. And now this should work. Okay, so we're getting the error, cannot read properties of undefined reading C. So let's look at this code real quick. So our issue here is that we define this.widget down here, but we're sending it into rendersea up here before it's defined. So all I need to do is move that down there. So we define this.widget, and then we send it into rendersea in the init function. And then the update function is fine because this.widget has already been defined in the init function when this code runs. So let's save that and run it. And now we've got our blue sea rendering. Okay, so I want to show you how to change the options at runtime. We set the options at the beginning here in page1.load, but you can actually change them at runtime. So we're going to add some UI and allow the user to click on the UI and change things on runtime. The first thing that we're going to do is change the colors. So you notice here there's some light green, some dark green, and when I hover, it does a new color, a really light green. So we're going to go ahead and change those colors. So let's create our UI first. So let's go to page1.cs. I'm going to add a text box. We'll go ahead and call it maximum color. Hit escape a few times. And right now this is just set to text so they can type text in it, but we don't want them to type text, we want them to select a color. So you can actually change the input type. If you click on this little plus sign here, you'll notice it says type as text. I can change that to color. And now the user can set a color. We're going to go ahead and move this over here. Go ahead and copy it, paste it again. So this will be maximum color. This will be minimum color. And this will be hover color. Okay. What else? I want to change these names. Right now this is just called text box 1. But let's make that a little bit clearer. We'll call it text box max. This can be text box min. And this can be text box hover. There we go. And then I want to go ahead and attach to the text change event. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Do that for all 3. There we go. Okay, so let's work on the max and min first. So if I scroll down here, you'll see we have a color axis, and this is our minimum and maximum color. You can see min color, max color are set here. So I just need to do this in C#. If you look over here, this is where we set the color axis initially in C#. We just set it to hard-coded values for colors. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that. Paste that there. And then, so the max, we want the max color to be text box max dot text. And we actually want the min color to be set to. We want that to be the text box min dot text. Okay, so let's see if this works. So text box max. Okay. It is not working. Okay, let's fix this error. So if you look in the HighCharts Maps documentation here, you'll notice there's this update function which allows you to redraw any element of the chart. We need to call this function. Currently it's not being called, and that's why it's not actually updating when we change the options. So if I go here into init script, on update is when I want to call it. So let's make this look a little bit prettier. And so we're calling rendersea, we're updating the data, and then we just want to say this dot widget dot update, right? Because that's what it's called. It's called update here, and you can see we're sending it in the options, so I'm going to send it options. And that's it. There are 3 parameters here, but you notice they are all optional parameters. Right, so we have redraw one-to-one and animation. Redraw one-to-one and animation, but they are all optional, so we can just ignore them. Okay, so that's all set up. Let's click OK. Save that and run it. And you'll notice our map is black. You notice it actually was green and then it flashed and went to black. We'll fix that in a bit, but let's see if maximum color works. So if I set it to red, there you go. Now it's red. The reason it's going to black is because these text boxes' initial values are black, and the text changed event is firing whenever the text boxes are created. That's why it was green and then it went to black all of a sudden. So to fix this, we can just make sure that the initial values are green. The other thing I need to do is implement minimum color and hover color. But let's go ahead and make these green. Here we go, min color, max color. So this is my min color. This should be my light green. So min color, we'll set the text. Here we go, text. Set that, and now you can see it's that nice green color. Maximum color, we're going to copy this and set the text. There we go. And then hover color, I believe, here we go. This was the initial hover color, was a green color. There we go. So let's see, let's test that real quick. There we go. And now it's this nice green color. And if I change it, let's say to pink, changes to pink. Okay, so now we need to implement minimum color and hover color. Minimum color is very easy. It's actually just the same thing as max, right? Because we actually set the min color and max color there. So we can just copy paste that code. Hover is a little bit more interesting. So you'll notice the hover color is set, and it's in this series where we have our graticule and our get data. It is set right here. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy that. Okay, there we go. Pasted it in. And we need to change this color, right? So this color is going to be set to this hover color, and instead of being set to being green, so that was, oh, no quote there. Oh, was that lowercase t maybe? Yes, text box hover dot text, and then we'll just keep the border colors black. We won't allow the user to change that. All right, so let's go ahead and run this. So let's set the maximum color. Let's set the minimum color. And let's set the hover color. Then test that out by hovering. Yep, so that is all working. Awesome. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a button that allows us to move to different coordinates on the globe. Essentially, we're going to be rotating the globe to different coordinates. So let's go ahead and create a button. I'll double click on the button, add a click event. And here we're just going to essentially call a function called rotate map. Let me paste in the code. So here we're creating a rotation, which is just where we're going to rotate the map to. And then this .widget1 to get our widget, .call to call a JavaScript function. The name of the JavaScript function is rotate map, and the parameter we're sending it is rotation. Now, if you were to run this, it would complain that there is no rotate map function. So we need to go create the rotate map function. So let's go do that. So we'll just call it this dot rotate map. We'll send in one parameter, which is the coordinates. And then we need to actually rotate the map. So if I look at my example code here, you can see here we set the map view and we set the rotation, right? So this is what we need to set here. So I can just do this dot widget dot map view, and I can call update. I'll show the documentation for that real quick. So this is the map view class, and if we look, there is an update function. So you send it the options, and then optionally you can send it booleans for redraw and for animation. So we're going to send it the options. And let me look at what those options were. Max zoom we don't care about. We need projection, and we don't care about name, we care about rotation. So we care about projection and rotation we're going to set to be chords. So let me paste that in. So we have projection, rotation chords, and then this whole thing needs to be encased in curly brackets. Let me make that look a little bit nicer. Okay, so let's go ahead and test this out. All right, here we have our button. So if I click on my button, it rotates. Although you see it's a little bit wonky, especially when I do it the second time, right? So it's not quite centered. It's rotating to North America, which is what the coordinates are for, but it's kind of detaching this from the globe. Okay, so let's go ahead and fix that. First things first, there is an issue with this .update. This line of code needs to go first. So what's going on here is this is setting up our options, right? It's setting the data variable to this .getgraticule, which sets up our latitude and longitude. And after that's set up, we use options to update the widget, and we use the widget on rendersea. So we want to make sure that this is done first. Next, let's fix this .rotate map. So I'm going to go ahead and create a variable to make things easier. So var map view equals this dot widget dot map view, and here then I can just say map view dot update. Next, let's go ahead and create some variables, center and zoom. Okay, so let's look at this line of code right here. So we're taking mapView.center. If that is valid, it will be set to mapView.center.slice, so a copy of it. Otherwise, it'll be set to 0, 0. And a similar thing is going on with this zoom with this OR operator here in JavaScript. So if it is truthy, as in not null or something weird, it'll be set to mapView.zoom. Otherwise, it will be set to 1. So we've got center and zoom created. Then we're going to call the setView function, which let me pull up the documentation here real quick. So this is the documentation for mapView. This is setView, so we send it center and zoom, and then optionally we can send it booleans for redraw and for animation. So I'm going to go ahead and call that so we're sending it center, zoom, and false, as in redraw will be false. Then we're also going to say chart dot redraw is false. Okay, so let's see if that fixed it. All right, we've got our globe. It's rotating pretty good. When I click on the button, we get map view is not defined. Okay, let's fix this code here. So instead of calling it map view, we'll just call it MV. So we'll say MV here we'll say this dot widget dot map view. Here we'll say this dot widget dot map view, and this is actually an error here. This shouldn't be chart. That should be this dot widget. Okay, let's go ahead and run that. And rotate it, click on the button, and there we go. It is now working. All right, so there's one final thing we're going to do for our sample. Right now we have a button that we can click on and it goes to North America, it just goes to those coordinates. Let's make it a little bit nicer. Let's go ahead and add a combo box that can go to different coordinates. So I'm going to add a combo box here. I'm going to go ahead and edit items. I'm going to add a couple of continents. Okay, so there we go. We've got our combo box. It's got some items in it. Let's go ahead and add an event for when the selected item changed. So I'm going to double click there, and let me just paste in some code and then explain it real quick. Let me make sure I've got the brackets correct. Not too many brackets. Okay. There we go. Okay, so our rotation is an array of integers, and it's set to North America by default because we need to set it to something. And then we have a switch case statement, so it'll switch based on whichever region you click on, and it'll set to a different rotation. And then we call rotate map, and we send it the rotation. So you remember this line of code is the same thing that we were doing up here with the button click, right? It's just a little bit more elaborate now that we have all of our different options we can choose from in this combo box. So let's go ahead and save that and run it. And there we go. Here's our combo box. I can choose different continents, and it will rotate accordingly. All right. So that is our little example here of how to create a HighCharts Maps widget in Wisej. Bye.